Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Public Works Committee will now come to order, please. We have not an extended discussion, but we do have some important items on for review. The only thing on the consent agenda, thank you, is approval of the summary of minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded to approve the item C1. Unless there is discussion, those in favor, please say aye. Or no. Okay, we got to vote.
Got to vote.
All right, please vote. And it's unanimous. Very good. Let's go back then to item G1, and if you'll read the item, please.
Item G1, motion to excuse Councilmember Taylor for voting on item G2.
All right. Is there discussion or a motion?
Move approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion? Hearing none, those, if you'll please vote, please. And that is passed unanimously with, of course, Councilmember Taylor not voting. Now let's go to the first substantive item on the agenda, G2, please.
Item G2, resolution authorizing the grant of an access easement for 3 parcels landlocked by city-owned property pursuant to NCGS 168-273, located in the southeast ward.
All right, and coming up here. Technology is wonderful. Still not coming up on my computer. I won't hold everybody else up. Who's reporting on this, please?
Good morning, Eric. Good morning.
It's morning somewhere.
It's not morning yet. It may feel that way.
I have a little bit of hurricane on the brain. My apologies, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee.
Right.
Good afternoon. This item's fairly straightforward. If you look at the map that's included in the packet, the 3 lots are clearly indicated. They're undeveloped and are located between Hubert Court and city-owned property to the west and to the south. The proposed access easement is indicated in the yellow hash mark. It would allow access to those 3 lots from Hubert Court.
Are there questions?
Is this a right-of-way, a city right-of-way that we're going into on this thing? It looks like on the mapping that it's an unused street.
Councilmember Larson, it has the properties of an unused street, but it's actually a 50-foot by 800-plus foot lot. I couldn't find any records that indicated that it was right-of-way.
Or was it intended to be a street?
I have no knowledge of what the intentions were.
Sure looks like a street. Smells like a street. So the point is to open it up to give access to lots that are currently not accessible because it's not a street.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So we're just opening up a street basically, and by providing this, do we anticipate traffic going down this right of way?
It's not public traffic. It would be an access easement to the property owners, private property. Yes, sir.
So are we closing? So is it a right of way or a transfer? I mean, the question is, are we abandoning this property and transferring it to
No,
the
sir.
adjacent property owners?
We're providing them an easement to access the property. It's not a transfer of ownership. There's no transfer of real property.
I just don't understand why we got this, and if we're doing this, do we anticipate opening it as a street at some point?
Not to my knowledge.
Why are we just not abandoning it and transferring it to the adjacent property owners?
There wasn't a request to. It's not an abandonment because it's not a right-of-way to abandon. It's a city-owned property, so there would have to be a real estate transaction that accompanies that.
I'm fine giving access to the property. I think it's great. I just don't know what we end up doing with this little piece of property that looks like a road to me and not functioning as a road, but it's providing access now to property.
Yes, sir. So two points to that. In the future, should it be developed, it would be on the developers to develop that and then convey that infrastructure, that street, to the city should they choose to, unless they choose to keep it private. On the other side, private property owners grant the city access easements all the time, so we can get to access our greenways, access our sewer infrastructure, and things like that. So this is a relatively standard practice to and from the city.
If the property owners are comfortable with it, it just looks like a road to me and looks like it should have accessibility on it the way it's standing.
That's not what we're being asked for here, Mr. McIntosh.
So if these 3 lot owners wanted to build a house back there, they would have the option of improving this easement by crusher run or whatever, or bringing it up, or improving it to city standards and asking us to accept it as a city street.
Yes, sir.
And I'm just curious whether or not it's how GIS kind of functions. It doesn't cover the whole width of it. Is that by design, or is that just the way it's?
Yes, sir. That's correct. That easement allows for adequate access, but doesn't grant access to the entire property.
Thank you. Mr. Montgomery.
One, I move approval of the item. If there's a second, I had a comment.
Is there a second? I'll second.
And to the, I think the questions that were asked by Councilmember Larson, one of the things, if the property was sold to any one individual or property owners there, it would not grant access for every property owner that abuts. Even if one property owner purchased it, they would still have to get an easement from another property owner to access the property. So the easiest way is that the city grants that easement to all of the property owners who access that, rather than one property owner having control and granting easement to other property owners. And then again, if it's improved as we do now with any other streets, folks make the private improvements and then convey that back over. So makes sense, stuff we've done before.
My understanding, this is a pretty routine type of request that can go either way. As has been pointed out, the city can request access, or or private parties can request access. And I hear that this is recommended by the staff without anticipating any adverse impacts to the public interest.
That's correct.
So, further discussion? If not, please vote on the proposal that's in front of you. And that's approved 3-0 with Mr. Taylor having been excused from voting. Let's go then to item G3, please.
Item G3, presentation on the Long Creek Master Plan.
And first, to set the stage, this is an information item only, as I understand. Very well. Mr. Royce.
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the committee.
Good afternoon.
This master plan process for the former Lone Creek golf course began approximately over a year ago. It typically, as we go through our process, we invite and engage the community to gain some input and feedback from them in terms of what they would like to see developed as a park. We held a series of public meetings, the first of which was on March 29th of this year, where we were actually approached by the Conservation Fund. We had an opportunity to swap some of the city-owned property with a piece of property that was owned by Hubbard. The community, we provided some information to the community, came back and presented information to council to move forward with that land swap. Also at that meeting, there was a discussion about the first public input session that we would have with the community to gauge some feedback from them, and that first meeting was held on April the 26th. At that meeting, it was more so of just an informational gathering meeting where we solicit information from the community to gauge what they would like to see developed. And basically, it's an opportunity for the community to provide us a wish list. We then take that information back, develop a schematic design, and we came back and presented that information to the community on May 22nd. Use that as an opportunity to gain additional feedback, refine the schematic design, and then came back on June 19th and presented the final schematic master plan. What you see on the screen now gives you an idea of the whereabouts and the layout of the park-owned property in relationship to Bethania and the future Beltway, which is to the north. Let's zoom in on one area. Do this. There we go. There we go. The area which you see on the map now shows the existing pool, the parking areas, the existing clubhouse, which is located at the park. This is Bethania Tobaccoville Road. To the south is to the south, you see Bethania Rohall Road, which takes you straight into downtown Bethania. And to the north, there were several concerns from the community about how the Beltway would impact the park property or the park development. And as you can see, we received information from DOT showing that the Beltway would be just to the north of our park property and should not have any impact at all as in regards to future park development. This piece of property here, again, is the piece that we obtained from Hubbard, which we believe will allow us access to the Mountains to Sea Trail and provide future trail access for the residents in the community. The preliminary master plan for Long Creek encompassed many of the ideas that the community requested throughout the public input portion of the design process. Again, I'm gonna focus on the main entrance area, which is an area throughout the schematic design process that we identified should have the ability to host the most development for new features. At the main entrance of the park, the residents will have a new bathhouse. The existing bathhouse would then turn into a maintenance facility that our city crews could use for storage for pool chemicals. There's a dog park that is located, a proposed dog park, which is located here. An open field play area. There's a schematic shown here that shows a soccer field, but it could actually host a number of outdoor activities, including frisbees, just general park use, soccer, lacrosse, or some other outdoor activities. There's a proposed splash pad here, which is part of the development. There's a pump track, very similar to what we have out at the fairgrounds for mountain bike, for entry-level mountain bike level courses, but it's called a pump track. That came as a request from the community, which is located here. There are also several picnic shelters, and also a picnic shelter that has a comfort station attached with it as well. One interesting point that we found throughout the public input is that many of the residents that live around the park own their own golf carts. And one of the things that I wanted to make sure that we made mention of for the picnic shelters, that all the picnic shelters that have been included as part of this master plan include parking spaces for golf carts. We think that is a great opportunity. We receive a lot of positive feedback. It's something new that we wanted to try here, but we think that we found ways to make it work with the existing cart paths, providing some minor renovations to them, but it would also provide some help for those persons who have mobility impairments to provide access to the park, given the tough terrain. There's one of the things that came out of the public input was a request for a recreation center, and that recreation center is shown here on the plan. We have several parks throughout our park system where recreation centers have been requested by the community. We do provide those on the plan and show those on the plan, but realizing that we have very strict discussions with the community that this may be something that may be a long-term development idea. Many of the existing cart paths at the former golf course are in pretty good condition. We have 3 bridges that are in need of renovation, but the cart paths themselves are in pretty good condition. So it will be our thought to renovate those cart paths. Let me get this backwards. Renovate those cart paths and provide a cohesive walking loop throughout the park, regardless of what area of the park that you would access. So there's a main loop which uses the existing cart paths here, and there are several smaller loops, one to the north of the property and one around the immediate area, which is considered now to be the main entrance of the property. One of the things that resulted as a part of the public input were secondary access points so that you don't have to drive down Bethania Tobaccoville Road to enter the park, but have some closer neighborhood connections along Turfwood and Cliffdale. In this particular area of the park, we developed a small parking lot area, picnic shelter, small playground, and there are some walking trails that will be included as part of the development through there, which the residents were very, very happy about. There's a comfort station, and it allows the members and the residents that live closer to this end of the park to enjoy some very, very nice park amenities without having to travel down to the main entrance of the park to enjoy those. Another amenity that was requested throughout the public input session were native trees and possibly some areas to provide some orchard type trees. We've included that on the plans as well. We will work with the community, and I had a pretty large group that offered to kind of come in and almost adopt this area, maintain it, and work with our department to develop some outdoor educational programs that kind of plays on the history of why these orchard trees are here and some of the other native plants and grasses. Again, you can see some of the existing cart paths. This area is actually up on a knoll, but we thought it was a great opportunity to provide those orchard trees as the community requested. There's also another area of the site that's actually very, very interesting. It's kind of a hidden jewel there, which is this pond. One of the things that when walking the site that the community requested was that we kind of open this area up and clean it up. I believe this pond was used for irrigating the golf course. We would provide a boardwalk and provide some picnic areas through there to allow the community to kind of come out and enjoy that water feature. People will be naturally drawn to it. It would be, in my opinion, that we develop that and kind of structure it so that it's as safe for people to use as possible. That area is one of the prettier areas and more scenic areas on the site. All the way to the north, which is another very, very, very scenic area of the site, we provided an overlook shelter with golf cart parking. You can see the bridge that provides access from the existing property over to the property that we obtained from Hubbard to provide access to the Mountains to Sea Trail, as well as providing an overlook that there's some tremendous views from this point looking out over the property that Hubbard currently owns. Throughout the master plan process, we typically provide several image boards that kind of convey certain design elements to the community. We have, to give you an idea of what we were looking at in terms of providing some historical signage at the park to kind of talk about the history. Met with Michelle McCullough and several other people from the planning department and looked at ways that we can use descriptive signage, which we have commonly done in our parks to kind of provide that outdoor educational element and help kind of tell the story of our parks. At the boardwalk area, looking at doing some sort of signage that kind of describes the type of wildlife and other native plants and grasses that you would see in that area. Providing some views, providing some views to the native plants and grasses and providing views to some of the areas that would be overlooked. This is kind of from a design standpoint where we'll be looking at what the vision would be for those natural areas and overlooks. And again, you can see the signage that we would develop to help tell that story. And the community felt that these images, we provided several images to them, but these were the ones that they picked that they would want to see developed as we move forward with any sort of development at the park. Architecturally, we presented several images for the different architectural styles for the picnic shelters and for the comfort stations there at Long Creek. So this top area that you can see several different types of architectural styles. One that stuck with the community more than others was this particular style of shelter. They thought that felt they liked the progressive architectural style. They liked the space. They liked the openness. They didn't want a picnic shelter that close them in. And so we looked at developing a style of restroom and picnic shelter. This is actually the restroom that kind of played on that existing style. And these are the images that kind of gives you an idea of what the comfort station would look like. Areas on the roof to provide natural sunlight into the restroom area, as well as the picnic shelters themselves that's the comfort station, and then the picnic shelters on here. They like the open air shelters. They wanted to feel like that they weren't confined, very similar to many of our picnic shelters throughout our park system. And yes, sir.
Yeah,
You pause for a question.
yeah, just a quick question.
Sure.
I know this is a plan. This is conceptual. Do you have an idea of the potential cost for that shelter? I think it's kind of slick, and I like it. I'm just trying to.
Yeah, we will provide a cost estimate. I'm gonna get to that as soon as I finish this. But we got a cost estimate for everything that's been presented. We had our consultant provide a cost estimate to us so that we would have an idea of what it would take to build this out.
I'll be patient. Thank you.
Near the, as I mentioned earlier on the master plan, the entry area of the park, there were 4 picnic shelters. And you can see from this design that they are open, they aren't confined, and that the residents felt that this design, they enjoyed this layout and this style of architecture for their picnic shelters, but it would be something that we would duplicate throughout the site as we develop shelters, so that the architectural styles, the benches, the water fountains, they'll be unique to the parks, that when you saw them, they'll be easily identifiable as Long Creek, as belonging to Long Creek Park. As you mentioned, Councilmember Taylor, the cost estimate, we had asked our consultant to provide a cost estimate for all of the improvements that were shown on the plan. The cost estimate for implementing everything from the infrastructure, recreation center, all the paving, came in at an estimate of $19,151,580. And I know that seems like it's a large number, and we were very clear in meeting with the community that this project of this size will have to be phased in. It does include the restroom, but we have about 163 acres of parkland with absolutely zero infrastructure. There are some things that, again, I like to refer to as low-hanging fruit. There are some things that we can implement there at the site and on the park that would not cost a lot of money, that I think could make an immediate impact that the community would enjoy. And we will focus on those improvements first. Yes.
Go ahead. Is that the conclusion of your presentation?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Questions? Yeah, I would just concur with your final analysis there. There's some relatively low-cost improvements that could make this immediately enjoyable to the surrounding area. I always like to see those pedestrian accesses, so you can provide opportunity to as many nearby neighborhoods as possible, direct walking and biking connection that doesn't require the residents to get out on the main heavily trafficked, no sidewalked roads. And I hope that will end up being a part of the early plans here. The architectural design looks very nice, and I imagine there'll be a lot of areas looking for that kind of thought in the future. Other comments?
Yeah. I think you've done a nice job of incorporating this, laying this. It's obviously a golf course. It's obviously had a lot of challenges just based on the configuration, but the nice thing about it is that it really embraces the neighborhoods. And it seems like you have had good communication with neighborhoods, but the houses are just almost intermixed in a lot of ways with this park and gives a lot of accessibility to it. And I think you've done a great job of creating these pods in different parts of the park that stand alone in the sense of how they can function and support the bigger park or smaller units. It's expensive, it's expensive, everything is. But it's an investment long term, and it'll be phased out. It'll be phased in. And we know where we're going, so we have a roadmap to do that. So I think it's a great idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
McIntosh.
You know, we received criticism a couple of years ago for our lack of parks. This, to me, I think we got a great deal on the land on this one. I think it was a really good buy. And I can see how this can come into, this can be utilized very quickly without a ton of money and gradually working into a $19 million budget. I understand will take some time, but it really, I think, finished out will be kind of one of the jewels of our system. I think it's a really wonderful idea, and it supports a part of town that currently doesn't have a whole lot of park facilities.
Yeah, we're, currently there are a lot of residents that are using the site now for walking. It's being maintained by vegetation management. We have park crews that are going out there and keeping it, maintaining it at a level that people can use it at least for walking right now. There are some areas that we will continue to make improvements, adding trash cans, adding benches, and slowly get to a point where it truly is a gym that's shown on the master plan.
It's a lot of grass, though, isn't it?
Yes,
We got a lot of mowing. And we thought about livestock.
Sheep.
Goats.
We've talked about it internally, not seriously, but we have talked about it.
Well, you're actually proposing to do a mix of maintained grass near the paths and revert it to a sort of more natural mid-level vegetation further back.
Yes, there's some areas that on the site where when you're walking down the existing path that there's some areas that probably need to be cleared out where we could come back and plant some native grasses, some wildflowers, and do some things like that so that we don't have to send our crews out to maintain and mow, that play on that natural beauty and use some native plants to do that. We've worked with the Forsyth County Audubon Society. They've gone through and done a very, very thorough analysis of every bird that they saw. They identified all the plants, gave us scientific and common names for all of that, and we used that plant list for our development. So we're reintroducing native plants and native grasses as part of our master plan processes.
Yeah, when that's done on a planned basis in areas like this, you really see a payoff just for the beauty of the area and the attractiveness to people using it. You get that those native wildflowers, butterflies, pollinators, birds that make it a great experience for all ages. Other questions or comments? Yes.
How much, if any, of this is actually within the independent town of Bethania?
Excuse me,
Is any of it inside the corporate limits of Bethania?
No, sir.
None of it?
No, sir.
But we're going to welcome them to our park, aren't we?
Yes, sir. We're going to show them how we do it in Winston.
We will, because we're such a good city. Yeah.
This gives us our first port of access on Muddy Creek. Okay. Anything else? All right. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.
Let's go to the next item, please.
Item G4, presentation on dockless bicycle and scooter share program.
Oh, and isn't this a hot topic? All right. And presenting will be...
I would like to make a few comments
All right.
Before the presenter.
The attorney will initiate.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Pursuant to several questions raised by Councilmember Larson, I did a little research on these motor vehicles / devices, and I just want you all to know I think there are some legitimate questions, concerns about whether or not these devices can be driven on public streets. And if you're interested in implementing a program, developing and implementing a program, I would suggest that before at least implementing it, you allow that question to be resolved, because I think there are some legitimate questions as to whether or not they can be driven on public streets. And then, of course, the issue of the sidewalks, which council controls. Right now, I think there are some ordinances in place that would prohibit those from being driven on city sidewalks.
I think it's my understanding, based on your memo, that the answer is, in the law, is clear. No, it's not legal to, operate the electric scooters on the sidewalks. It's not safe either.
Yeah.
Would that be a correct statement?
Yes. I know there are other cities who have them, but I don't believe that they necessarily looked at all of the possible laws that might apply.
But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt your presentation.
No, the presentation is going to be made by someone else. I just wanted to give you all that caveat before you
All
proceeded.
right, thank you. We may have some other questions for you before we, Mr. Montgomery?
Well, it was a question to a statement that you made just now that was confirmed here about just there may be a question of legality of use on the street, but then also we may have something on the books that may make it prohibited on sidewalks. Do we name, because I know we had this conversation around segways, and so there are segways that operate on our on sidewalks. What separates the identity of a segway and a scooter? They're not gas. Neither one are gas. They're both electric. The argument can make that they're the same type of quote-unquote motorized vehicle. So how would one potentially be allowed on the sidewalk and the other, or are both of them operating illegally? Because I thought we'd address that from a segue, because we got the Segway tours and the stuff that happens.
Let me deal with the streets versus the sidewalks first. In terms of the streets, the General Assembly actually went back and modified Chapter 20 to make or to include a specific definition that would address the segways. If you have your package that I sent to you this afternoon, if you look at 20-4.01 definitions, and if you go to paragraph 27, there is basically a definition that would allow the segways to be operated on city streets. But when you look at the definition of those devices, it does not appear that segways are included. In section 50-21, exempt from registration, there is a definition or a term called electric personal assistive mobility devices as defined in 20-4.01 7B. And when you go to 7B, it says it is an electric personal assistive mobility device. It's a self-balancing, non-tandem, two-wheel device designed to transport one person with a propulsion system that limits the maximum speed of a device to 15 miles per hour or less. And it's my understanding that the scooters are not considered a non-tandem two-wheel device. So that being the case, it does not fit into the exemption that the General Assembly created for the segways in 50-51 that I read to you earlier.
So as I understand, what you're saying is that there is a special provision in state law which allows the segways to legally operate on the street, not the sidewalk.
Right.
To operate on the street. Now, in terms of the sidewalk, I'm not sure if we went back, the city council went back and addressed the segways on the sidewalk. I have to look for that.
I don't recall that we did. Does anyone else?
No.
I see
Pretty
it.
mean.
Yeah, I mean, you see all sorts of things on the sidewalk that aren't supposed to be there. But anyway.
But basically, the General Assembly, in terms of operation on the public streets and highways, created an exemption for the segways, which is why you see them on the streets. That doesn't seem to apply to the scooters because they don't seem to fit that definition. And if Lori Sykes or someone else has any other thoughts, please let me know. But that's how I looked at it this afternoon.
Okay. So any other questions about the legal matter before we go to, yes, Ms. Maxwell?
So the segue definition was added into this at some later point, right? This law exists.
Fairly recently, yes.
Right. Do you have an idea when?
Hold on one second.
So this law has evolved to accommodate other devices.
Bear with me.
My bet would be that Uber and Lyft have people in Raleigh as we speak.
If you look at 20-51, And if you look at the end on page 2 of what I sent to you guys, the last revision to that section was in 2016. And I think that's about when they added segways. Don't hold me to it, but I think
But
that's
recently?
fairly recent.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, then, thank you.
So
Ms.
just
Harvey.
proceed with caution.
I hear that.
To them too.
And presenting on the nature of the programs, we have Mr. Duquesne and Ms. McCullough listed, but it looks like Mr. Burzik has come to the podium.
I believe I'm taking this one.
Taking one for the team?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. members of the
No.
committee. I would like to present on some background information on the scooter share program, as well as some other iterations of shared active transportation programs that we can probably anticipate coming here from the experience of other communities. Get us all on the same page so that you all can make an informed decision about how to go forward with this kind of a program, which is just expanding throughout the country. Whether it's bike share, scooter share, it's becoming a bigger and bigger program. So just some background information. What is the scooter share? So unlike the Zagster bike share program that the National Cycling Center has in place right now, this one is dockless. So users can pick up these scooters from any location in the city and drop them off at essentially any location in the city right now. They're electric powered, so besides 2 or 3 kicks to get the scooter going, it is entirely motorized. It doesn't require any user input as far as powering it. The top speed is 15 miles per hour. At 15 miles per hour, the motor cuts out. Now, if you're coasting downhill, you can exceed that 15-mile-an-hour speed limit, of course. It's upright, 2-wheeled scooters. So these scooters, as opposed to the Segways are non-tandem. These are tandem-wheeled scooters. That's the major difference. They are operated through mobile applications, so you need a smartphone to be able to operate one of these. You essentially scan QR code on the scooter itself to initiate your rental. And in order to set up an account, you scan your ID, you scan your credit card, that kind of thing. So it is entirely based on those mobile applications. And then the fee, this varies by community, I believe, but generally it's in the range, this range here that's shown. And this is the range that is being applied in our community right now. So it's $1 to begin your ride, and then it's about 20 cents per minute after that. So looking at the evolution of transportation sharing, not only in our community but nationwide. So the dock bike share was really the introduction to this kind of shared transportation, and that's the Zagster system that we have in place here. At about the same time that we launched the Zagster program here, the dockless bikes became prevalent. So this is an image of Lime Bike. The initial launch of that company was in Greensboro, almost at the same time that we launched the Zagster program here. So like the scooters that are out there now, these bikes do not have docking stations and can be used anywhere throughout the community and dropped off anywhere. Next came the scooters, and that's where we are. So we kind of skipped that dockless bicycle step in the process here in the evolution, but chances are that will come to us eventually as well. So keep in mind that may come. And then, with that in mind, what is the next step? So any kind of, whatever option we decide to go with, just keep in mind that this is constantly evolving, and we may need to address the next level of shared transportation. So some opportunities, some potential benefits with scooter share and bike share generally. The major thing is that can help address the first and last mile of transit trips. So if somebody arrives downtown via the transit system, whether it's Worcester or Park, they can hop on one of these scooters or one of the bike share bikes and make it the last half mile to their office or the last mile to their office, and vice versa, getting back to the transit center. And that's just one example. There are many other opportunities there. Replacement of motor vehicle trips. I think especially downtown, this would be a great benefit to have fewer vehicles on the road. especially with Business 40 closure and the potential for many more vehicles on the roads. Anything that's helping replace some of those trips with other modes may be beneficial. Relatively low cost, I say not zero cost, because there will be administrative, there will be enforcement issues that need to be addressed, but the companies that are providing these scooters, they do not require a fee from the city to operate. And then convenience to users, so it's another transportation option for people who are looking for other modes. And the thing to keep in mind is, not only the scooters but the bikes, do these share programs contribute to what our city goals are? That's the question that I've been pondering about. Some of the potential threats, so safety issues, of course. If you have scooters, I'm not going to address the legal issues, but if you have scooters on the sidewalks, you have people who are walking at 2 or 3 miles per hour and scooters that can reach 15 miles per hour. There's a natural threat there. Scooters riding in the street, so the safety of those riders in traffic situations. Where do they ride on the streets? Do they ride in the motor vehicle lanes? Do they ride in bike lanes, if we have streets with bike lanes? And then helmet usage. We have helmet laws for cyclists under the age of 16 right now in the city. Over 16, you're not required to wear a helmet, but we don't address helmet usage among other users of other modes of transportation. And then accessibility issues. So, this is an image that I think this has been pretty common in the media with these kinds of images of the scooters either blocking sidewalks, blocking pedestrian ramps at crosswalks, the scooters being left at bicycle racks, meaning that cyclists can't use those racks. There are all sorts of issues associated with that. Especially, if you look at our downtown, we have counts on 4th Street. We have about 1.4 million annual walking trips on 4th Street. And introducing scooters in that mix of traffic can present some issues. And of course, there are going to be costs, whether those are administrative, enforcement, management. The city will need to be involved with planning and in community engagement as well. So it's not free. Carmen mentioned some of the existing ordinances that apply to these to scooters in general. So I will just breeze through this quickly. And then operation of motor vehicles in parks and other public-owned areas as well. So in my mind, this gets to kind of the greenway issue. So I think that's another issue to keep in mind, is that how do these scooters interact with existing users on the greenways, whether those are cyclists or people walking or running. On the management side, there are communities that have embraced the scooters and have policies and ordinances in place to guide that, to guide the use of those scooters. There's some great examples from communities that I think we can borrow from if that's the course that we decide to take. There's a great guide that NACTO, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, has put out that can help us with some of those details. There are pilots underway in several communities. Charlotte is one of those. They are working on kind of a pilot study where the scooters have been allowed, and they will assess kind of the success and failures of those programs at the end of that pilot, and then go forward with whatever policy they deem necessary. So we can learn from those other communities and implement policies and ordinances based on their experience. And one part of this that I've seen from other communities is that they do resident surveys, so making sure that residents have a voice in how these scooters are managed. So some policy considerations from that NACTO guide. These were some of the core considerations that they had recommended that we look at, whether it's permit fees, so making sure that the companies that come in are working with the city to address any concerns that the city has. Fleet sizes, so what's the introductory fleet size? What kind of thresholds do we have for expanding or contracting systems? The safety issues that we mentioned. Equity issues, so ensuring that the scooters are available to everybody in the community who may benefit from them. On the data sharing side, with that the potential number of transportation trips, in the community, making sure that we have access to that data so that we can do planning and some engineering of some needed improvements, making sure that they have proper insurance. Some communities have even implemented a surcharge, so a per ride fee to help cover the expenses associated with managing these programs. System balancing, so each day, each scooter is essentially taken in by a contract employee from the company and charged and then relocated. So making sure that those locations are appropriate locations and that system is being balanced on a daily basis. Communication, whether that's between the city and the companies, to make sure that any concerns that the city has is being addressed and that we have a good channel of communication. And then that communication between the companies and the public as well, because those companies are the face, obviously, and kind of the first experience that the users have. So any kind of education or any messages will need to come through the companies most likely. Equipment standards, so ensuring that the scooters have lights, that they're safe to operate during the day and at night. Customer privacy standards, and then the charging that I mentioned. So some of the ordinance considerations to take into account: permitting, helmet usage, some of the items that we've already discussed, sidewalk and street riding, where the scooter should be parked, and then the definition of these scooters. Part of what I've seen from communities that are implementing these pilot programs is that they have a strong evaluation program on the back end to figure out what the numbers are for ridership, where the geographic distribution of those rides, where those rides are actually happening, any crashes, any complaints, and tracking all of that data so that we can evaluate the success or failure of the program. So some next steps, potentially identifying strategies for managing, if that's the direction we decide to go in. Again, what are the goals of the city, and then do these programs contribute to the goals that we have? Surveying residents, using the experience of other communities and that NACDO guide to create management policies, updating the ordinance to reflect any deficiencies that are currently there, coordinating with the shared active transportation companies, educating the public, and then evaluating the programs and management policies. So that's all that I have. I'm happy to answer questions. I know there's also a representative from Bird here. If you have specific questions about the program itself, I would defer to them on those.
Thank you. Questions? Mr. Montgomery.
One of my concerns in the process, one I think is interesting for us, and I think we need to, things evolve, and we have to begin to look at what our processes look like to allow for certain alternative ways for transportation. But the biggest concern for me is the safety question. If, in fact, we have a process that allows for the use of these at a high level, questions of use and safety and how that is policed in a way that regulates behavior is going to matter. Because you can have the policy, if it's not enforced, behavior will not model what that policy is. So there has to be some enforcement, and there will be a cost to ensuring that enforcement happens, and how do we properly facilitate that? Particularly just today, leaving a meeting earlier this afternoon, City Hall, and just passed a set of birds talking to a coworker saying, I took a ride the other day on it, and they were saying, I would never do that. And passing by the Reynolds building, two individuals, we have a green light, shoot straight through the intersection on their birds. There's a big Mack truck next to me, and I'm driving, and that creates the interesting place of where safety is as a concern on this person who's on this bird, and they shoot through that intersection. But the question then becomes the enforcement piece. We have downtown bike patrol, but downtown is not the only place that the birds are located. So that question of enforcement to a place that it curtails unsafe behavior is the biggest sticking point for me. I think there's a way to regulate, how we place them, where they're going, those kind of stuff. But when people are on them, what they're doing and how they're engaging, I find that a challenge on how it's policed to ensure that people operate them as a true means of transportation rather than some excitement of I'm riding down one of the steepest hills in downtown and I'm going to enjoy that. And I don't know if that's the newness of it that people are figuring out for us in the community or what that will mean long term. So that, for me, is the safety question.
Other questions or comments?
Go ahead, you've written one.
You're on it.
And then I'm going to comment.
Mr. McIntosh, I believe this is something that you
Something
will,
has occupied a lot of my time over the last, since they dropped on the Thursday before Labor Day. Yes, I had my helmet, I had my account, and I do use them downtown. I think we are in an evolving legal environment. I know we've got sort of standing law from the state, but I think that could change, like the Segway data did or governance did. I would like to hear from the company representative, though, about their take on the state statute and how that applies to municipalities. Charlotte, you go to Charlotte, they're all over the place. I haven't been to Raleigh since they've dropped there, but I would imagine they are. I don't know about Asheville. Greensboro's got some convoluted laws there that are local ordinances that are different than ours, but I would like to hear sort of a take on that.
without objection, if you'll come to the podium and give us your name and address, and you have the floor to respond to Mr. McIntosh's question.
Absolutely. I'm Kendall Miller. I'm the Community Relations Manager for the state of North Carolina with Bird. And
where are you from?
I'm from Charlotte.
And are you based in Charlotte?
I am.
For our being able to contact you in the future, would you give us your address, please?
Yes, 1305 Central Avenue, apartment 320, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28205.
Thank you very much. Please continue.
Absolutely. So just to address that, we've been in conversations with North Carolina Department of Transportation as well as the DMV, because we know that's a huge issue that's coming up, and how to actually define what our e-scooter is, because it's in that gray area right now that it doesn't fit that definition of a Segway, and it doesn't fit a definition of a dockless bike or something else. So we've taken that, upon ourselves to go to them to see what they can do for us. So I know that they're in the conversations right now. They're looking to get a definition back to us very quickly here. So that's the best answer I can give you right now.
Okay, I would stay put. I bet there'll be other questions.
Okay, no problem.
Did you ride here?
Not from Charlotte, because I know better than that, and it would take me way too long.
There's a tremendous amount of information online. Lots of articles have been written. I have yet to see a good one on injury data, and I imagine we're still kind of collecting that. That could be something that could sway my opinion about the validity of these if we start seeing spikes in injuries. I would hope that whatever form our regulation takes, it generates some revenue for us, at least to cover costs of administration, but also possibly to increase the number of bike lanes that we have, the mileage of bike lanes.
Absolutely.
Work to both ours and your advantages. I got a big long list, but the way I see it right now, that these are not, we cannot, I talked to Sergeant Bowers from the Downtown Bike Patrol and said, if we're going to write a ticket on these, where's that money go? And his opinion was that, like a motor vehicle fine, it would go through the court process, and we would get essentially nothing out of that. I would like to see if that is possible to have these categorized differently so that we could keep the revenue from it, because it takes man hours to do that, and we get none of the
Sure.
none of the rewards. And hopefully, we'll have some help in Raleigh to do that soon. Some of the models are like San Francisco. I know that they've been told to leave, but then they're coming back under essentially what I'd look at as like a medallion program, like New York City, where there's a limit on them and there's a fee paid by the company to have them in there. I think that's a potential for us to look at. I think doing nothing is a terrible idea. I think we need to have some laws around these. But bottom line is, people's behavior, to your point, is what is going to make these a great idea or a terrible decision by us to allow. I grew up at the Jersey Shore, and there was a period of time in the late 70s where mopeds came into existence, and they were the worst thing to have ever happened for about 2 years. And then people got over the newness of them, and they became a valid form of transportation, but they were awful for 2 years. They were really a major problem. So I would like an evaluation period. I don't think we're not doing anything tonight, but I think to just ban them would not be good for us, because I think there's probably a way for us to work together on it.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Mr. Larson?
Yes. Welcome to Winston-Salem, I suppose.
Thank you.
I would have liked to have given you an invitation to come. How many vehicles do you currently have on the street?
In Winston-Salem, we have 100.
100. And when did you start delivering these?
Right before Labor Day. So
And
we've been here for about 3 weeks now.
When did you deliver them? What time of day did you put these vehicles out on the streets of Winston-Salem?
That I could find out for you, but I don't
Yes,
know.
We don't.
my perception is that
I believe I was notified at, Shanique, was it 5:05 p.m.?
5:05 p.m. is when the first one was reported.
That's when I went down and took the picture of probably at least 90 of the 100.
90 of the 100. And when you started distributing those, where did you put them?
That, I'm sure, is something that our team and our launcher team help distribute. So we have a fleet coordinator here on the ground in Winston-Salem, and we take data based off of high traffic areas where either bus routes happen or if there's a light rail, something like that. And then we have nests, which is considered 3 or more birds, where they nest together and then they're placed out throughout the city.
More specifically, where did you place them?
I'm not
You
sure. I
placed
can
them
find
on.
out
You
for
placed them. I'll tell you where you placed them.
Okay.
You placed them on city sidewalks.
Yes.
Yes. And did you ask the city about placing this equipment on city sidewalks and walking away and abandoning them and letting them sit there in the right of way of city property? Did you ask anybody about doing that?
Not to my knowledge.
Is there any reason why we should not have gone around and picked them all up and thrown them in a compound somewhere as abandoned material?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, the point is, this sort of approach of how you came into our city, I found a little abrasive, quite honestly, and a little bit of hubris and almost insulting to the city as a whole. And I know this must be your marketing technique, and I'm sure it must work somewhere else, and I'm sure you've had other grumpy old men who don't want you on the grass, which is, I think, what I've already been quoted as being. But I've got to say that I would welcome an alternate transportation method, and I applaud some of the goals that this can achieve for the city. What I find abhorrent is the way your company has abused, I think, the city by coming in and dumping this stuff all over our sidewalks. And I find that horribly regrettable. And I would hope that we would find some mechanism through careful deliberation and working within the law that exists about how these things are to operate, where they are to be placed, how they're going to be stored. I don't know of anything else much that's stored on city property without being occupied or manned by something, but you just leave them there and walk away from them. In fact, it's really kind of even hard unless you go online to figure out how to communicate with you guys. And if they're falling over, if they're laying in the streets, if they're in the curb or the gutter, who do we even talk to about that? You have insurance? What is the process here? You haven't come into the city with any answers other than basically placing a lot of material on city streets. And, I regret that. I mean, I regret that we started out a relationship with that kind of hubris, as it were. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we have a lot of things to discuss legally, about liabilities, about what kind of hours of operation, what zones they could operate in. I mean, I've seen them from everywhere from downtown all the way up into Washington Park, and I'm not sure how they got there. I don't know whether they went on 4-lane state highways. I don't know whether they're operating on city streets. There's a whole series of things that bother me immensely about these things, this guerrilla approach of just throwing them out in the city and saying, okay, people, everybody go and enjoy your ride. And I hope that we can move quickly on this, because I know everybody wants to get it resolved. But the questions that were asked in this presentation are serious enough to me to say, I'm not sure you should have them on the streets right now. I'm not sure that it's appropriate that we have a period of free-for-all, as it were, while we're trying to sort it out as to what the hell we're supposed to be doing with these particular new system of transportation. We have the accountability of these individual objects. There's no central point. There's no guarantee of where they're going to be located or where they're going to be at night or where they're going to end up when somebody's finished riding one, as to whose storefront they're going to be in front of or whose car they're going to be leaned up against. And you can't police that. Your company cannot police that, apparently. And that's going to fall on somebody, and I assume it's going to fall on the city's responsibility. You know, the helmet law, the safety issues, the night driving. There's a series of things that are very concerning to me about safety issues which are being raised. I'd like these to be in the city, but I'd like them to be in a way that incorporates themselves within the guidelines that we generally operate. We've licensed bicycles, we've licensed pedal bars, we've worked with restaurants to allow them to be on sidewalks. You know, we've done these things, and we've worked through a deliberate process that allows it to happen, not a free-for-all. And that's what upsets me about it. If I could recommend something to committee tonight, I would recommend that they be withdrawn and that we enter into a serious discussion with you to allow them to exist within the city, either in a carefully constructed test pattern within certain parameters which have to be defined. That's where I stand on this matter.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Larson. Mr. Montgomery.
Can I just address it?
Actually, let's
Okay.
go around the table, please.
No problem.
Well, one, just to think in broader terms, I hear Councilman Larson. I understand the way in which things sidestep process, but I would venture to say that despite the fact that I agree that there are processes in cities and towns and communities, not just in North Carolina but across the country, where things like this are happening, when we think about the central idea of a scooter or a Segway or those things, the idea of what it means is not much different than other means that we have. It's just presenting itself in a different model, where we talk about a bicycle, or we're talking about rollerblades, or we're talking about a skateboard, or we're talking about an individual who's on that Segway. At the end of the day, it's some type of mechanism that is transporting a person from one place to another, but it's just being presented in a different form that is foreign to us in many ways. So thus, it presents a reaction that is different because it's not something that we relate to. The second part of that is, I believe that we're approaching a time, not just in this community, but across the country, where we're facing a decentralization of many, many mechanisms. And the questions that are being posed around where one item will go, where those pieces will, who will return this, or who's the person to call, presents much needed questions that need answers, but at the same time, it also, I think, is directing us to where we're looking at, from an economy standpoint, to a decentralization of many mechanisms. The fact that there is not a direct person who, one person you can call who can pick them up, creates the economic opportunity that someone from their cell phone has the opportunity to make income by picking them up, charging them, and then replacing them. There's an economic opportunity for the community, for people in the community, that is drastically different than what we're used to. And so I think this is, in many ways, revolutionary in how we're starting to see a technology economy evolve in many ways. And the tactic and strategy of what's being used, I think, was probably very, very seriously thought out in a room on the fact of how can we drive policy changes from a particular way. By dropping individuals in particular communities, forces policymakers to have a conversation about something. Same way when we go into a committee room or we go into a council meeting and individuals pack the chamber and they force us to reconsider an item that we've already made a decision on, that's the same type of thing, but it's presented in a different way, in a different format. So I align those in similar ways, but it's just presenting itself in different ways. And I think this is just one company that is using a particular way of showing us what a decentralized economy will look like in the future. And I think we'll see much more of this in different ways that's new to us, that we don't understand directly, but I think it's a way of the future in many different ways for different areas and sectors. This is just one sector that we're seeing it. I think we're going to see it in other sectors.
Oh, sure. Just a comment and pass the mic. Clearly, this is a business decision to force the issue by simply depositing a pre-selected number of items on the sidewalk and leaving them without public discussion, and that they had the opportunity to do that. Similarly, it's the city's forbearance that it hasn't simply picked them all up and taken them to the landfill as abandoned items on the public right-of-way. If necessary, the city is capable of forcing the discussion from the other end in that fashion as well. So it can be a shared negotiation and discussion, but if it is not, it can be resolved in a legally acceptable way that requires the next time it comes into the community to come in with a sort of an upfront discussion. Yeah, I don't consider electric scooters to be an existential threat, and I'm not calling for the nuclear option, but it can work both ways. Other comments or questions? Yes.
I just had a real quick one.
Josh.
I think staff did a really good job on the set of questions here in the overview, because I've done a lot of research, and this really encapsulated an awful lot of my questions and thoughts. So I want to just say thank you for the job well done there.
Can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
Folks may not be praising Bird right now, and I'm not necessarily praising Bird in the same sense, but I will applaud the equitable way in which the birds were placed in the city. I first time I saw them, I was riding down on the way to a board meeting, and I saw it over on Polo, and I said, okay, they're on Polo. And then I got back around, and I didn't see them one time when I went home on the corner of MLK and in Newark Town Road, but then when I came back around, they were on MLK, and the next thing I knew, I walked out of a building at work at Bethesda, and there were 3 setting up across the street, and said, well, I say that intentionally because a lot of times when we see things that come into a community, they're not equitably distributed across the community. I'm not sure what others have seen in their neighborhoods, but I was surprised by the way in which the fact that there were actually in places where everybody had access to use our bicycle sharing programs, that access does not exist the same way. So.
Chairman, I got one last question for the company representative.
And to play fair, of course, I'm going to give the lady visiting us an opportunity to make additional comments. So, go ahead.
Is it right? Do I understand it right that all these units are picked up every night?
That's correct.
So
they're
leave the
picked
street at what time?
7 p.m. That's when they start getting picked up. They should all be gone back to the charger's house. They get fully charged, and then they're delivered by 7 a.m. every day, and they're placed back out in their nests.
So the possibility of these becoming liquor sickles.
Exactly, and that's something where we don't want to happen at all. We say don't scoot and drink, so that's why we pick them up starting at 7 p.m.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely.
I had a question, actually. How do you select the nests? Are these all on the public sidewalk?
So these are all on the public sidewalk where the nests are placed. That I'm not sure how they're physically determined, the actual location of the nest placement. I think that's really based on like pedestrians, where the city flow of traffic is, where high pedestrian areas are, but I can find out a better answer for you.
Okay, well, thank you. Other comments?
They seem to move around.
Yes, so there's not a determined location for, if I pick one up right out front of City Hall and take it a mile down the road, I can just park it there, and at the end of my ride, I park it, I show that I did a good park job, I'm not in the middle of the sidewalk, and then once I end my ride, then I can carry on with my day. So they do move based on locations, but every morning at 7 a.m., they're back out to their original location.
I think Lime requires that you submit a photo of where you parked it.
Where you pay, yeah.
The Lime bike? Yeah.
Lime's good.
So I was going to ask, is anybody trolling the landscape to see if these vehicles are properly placed by your company?
That's what we're doing right now. And to your point earlier, you said you see them strewn about the sidewalks. Sometimes they're not parked right, or they might be dumped over on the side of the road. That comes into an accountability issue. So if you see something, you can send a picture to me. It goes right to my team, and we have chargers and a fleet coordinator here that gets that problem, that issue is addressed within less than an hour.
Other questions or comments? Thank you for a lighter moment.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Yes. Is there other business before this committee this evening?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't want to leave this topic without some program or goals of where we're going with this.
In that case, that's other business under this item. Please go ahead.
Under this item, I would like to know from the city management team or from staff, whatever, what is our next step in resolving this? I think we're agreed, or at least I heard, that doing nothing is not the answer currently, to just simply ignore the issue. And so can we devise a work program that will provide some regulatory aspect of immediately, a short-term, long-term, of how we're going to approach it? Otherwise, I'm going to make a motion that we remove them entirely from the city.
Okay.
My caveat
Ms.
again, I think you can devise a program, but before implementing a program, I think the issue of whether or not they can be legally operated on city streets needs to be resolved, because clearly they don't fit the definition of segways, so they don't fit that exemption that's in the statute that allows them to be operated on streets without being licensed and having insurance and all that other kind of stuff. So just keep that in mind as you look at developing a program. So I'll let staff talk about what kind of program.
Next up, Mr. Duquesne, Ms. McCullough.
Well, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, we're basically asking for your direction on what you would like to see from staff. Heard from the city attorney, you have to consider that. Would you like more information, examples of what others have done? You know, all that's readily available to supply to you. But we need direction from the chairman of the committee on what you'd like to see from staff.
Mr. Montgomery and then Mr. Garrett.
Well, I was just going to make a suggestion that we come up with a specific plan of action in and around deeper understanding on the legal question around whether or not the actual vehicles can, I don't want to call it vehicle, the scooters can be used on the sidewalks or on streets, whatever that question is. We need to get a specific responsive definition to that. And then also we need to answer the questions that were presented in the presentation in reference to if we're to have a standard program operating, do we want to have any additional fees associated with how they operate in the community and the oversight along with that? Those were the main things I heard from the conversation that I think needs to be framed in a way of a program of how it functions.
I think that essentially staff is being asked to report back with additional information. And frankly, I would suggest a time frame of the November committee meeting.
Agreed. I was going to say, we can bring back a draft ordinance answering those questions, looking at all the options. You know, our ability to assess a fee may be somewhat limited other than some voluntary contributions, but we can bring that back as well.
Mr.
I just
McIntosh?
request as much injury data as we can gather from other communities, and then a broad spectrum of best practices of what other people are doing that are successful.
All right, very good. And in the meantime, they are left on the sidewalks at the owner's risk.
Till 7 p.m.
Yes. So, all right. Other comments?
Mr. Chairman, I would recommend or move that we not allow any more than the 100 that currently exist in the city, that number not be enlarged while we're under deliberation.
I'm going to have to rule that out of order without more context. We don't have the authority to act on the spot in that regard. Do you?
We have authority to control what's parked on our sidewalk, do we not? And we have illegal vehicles on the streets and sidewalks. So I think it's reasonable to ask this company to put a moratorium on any additional expansion of this program within the city.
I think your request has certainly been heard by their representative. unless you want to make a formal request to the council as a whole to prepare some kind of directive for our police department or street cleaning crews.
Well, I don't know how, unless we go around and count them, I don't know. I mean, there's a certain amount of trust involved here. But the question is, since this has been a guerrilla attack from the go, how many more of these we're going to see appear while we're deliberating? And I think reasonably to expect that they've implanted what they're going to implant for now, and I hope that's the end of it, until we can reach some sort of working agreement. Would you like to comment on that? I mean, if nothing else informally, or what is the intent of your company at this point?
You're welcome to come back up, ma'am. Mr. Larson's posed an additional question.
I have one anyways.
All right, and Mr. Taylor has one after that.
I think that's a fair request. I would like to know the date that we're going to re-deliberate, though, so I can be here for the conversation and bring more points forward, especially if you do have questions that I can come prepared with answers for you. I know this is such a hot topic, and there are going to continue to be questions, and I'd love to be an advocate and a champion, and I want to be able to answer those questions, and I'm the community manager for this state, so whatever I can do to build this relationship and maintain it, that's why I'm here.
Well, what's the November committee date, Public Works?
It got moved.
Thanksgiving week, isn't it?
Yeah,
It
a week
had to
later.
because of the NLC conference.
Yeah.
It is the 13th.
It's a week
November
after.
20th, this committee will meet at November 20th, that's a Tuesday, at 6 p.m., and tentatively, we have asked for the items to be reported back to the committee at this stage. We're not in a position to make any guarantees with regard to what may be left on the sidewalk in the public right-of-way in the meantime.
Sure.
Just to be frank.
Sure.
Mr. Larson.
If I may add, a conversation requires two, so I would hope staff would be in conversation with you as we deliberate to try to navigate through this thing. In the meanwhile, I would hope you would use reasonable restraint and not impose on the city any more than you have.
Okay.
Mr. Taylor.
Thank you for being here and putting a face to Bird.
Absolutely.
So as you can see, there's a great deal of excitement. There's also a great deal of concern. And depending on where you are in the situation, sort of determines how you feel.
Sure.
So to those members of the community who are concerned about someone immorally or illegally placing these scooters on the sidewalk or leaning them against cars, you mentioned there was someone who could be reached out to. Pictures can be taken. So if someone doesn't have a smartphone, if somebody does have a smartphone, tell the people who might be watching this publication or who might watch future ones to come how exactly they can get in contact with you to address their concerns.
Sure. So they can email me. My email is kmiller, M-I-L-L-E-R, @bird.co, or they can call me, and my phone number is 262-490-1507. And that's my personal number, so call me. Like, I take this very seriously because this is a company I believe in, and I believe we're here to stay. This is an alternative transportation option, low carbon, low cost, and it's helping people get from that last mile to that first mile. So,
And ma'am, did you say kmiller@bird.co?
C-O.
C-O.
Yes.
Okay, B-I-R-D.
Yes.
Okay.
And Ms. Miller, you would agree that every community is different. I mean, what you see in Charlotte, what you see in Raleigh may not particularly be what you see in the city of Winston-Salem.
Absolutely.
So hopefully you'll be willing and ready to address concerns as they arise. I just appreciate being able to put a face with the name.
Definitely.
Now, I also am concerned just with the way you came in. But you're here, and it must be addressed. So we're looking forward to being community partners. Now, we may have to come to you and ask for some support.
Sure.
And that support could be in the form of, helping with regulation or financial compensation, for a lack of a better term. We will have to police this. We may have to add additional bike lanes. And hopefully you'll be willing and open to have further conversations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Montgomery.
I had a question, attorney, in the sense of the, and they
So
can
if
maybe,
you'd hang out for a moment.
maybe they bring some information back to this, if you know it or not. But with the change, the state made the change in the use for Segway on streets. Did that leave cities and towns with the ability to then regulate whether or not they allowed them in their cities and towns, or did by them simply allowing it on streets, it allowed it throughout the state? The reason I ask that is that if the state moves to clarify how we regulate, then could be how we regulate that could change.
I think as written, it's allowing the segways on streets throughout North Carolina. Now, in terms of sidewalks, local governments have the ability to regulate the sidewalks. I think you still can control what happens in terms of their being used on the sidewalk, but I think they're permitted, and I can go back and check, on the streets within the state of North Carolina.
Right. And so I know that it was already mentioned that there's these conversations happening with NCDOT, so I want us to make sure we keep an understanding of those conversations in conjunction with our conversations as well on how they could influence each other.
And I'm having those conversations.
Mr. Taylor.
Okay.
My comment is for Ms. Miller. I think Mr. Montgomery brought up a point of the equity in which the scooters were distributed, and we thank you for that. It's something that's very important to me. I've heard downtown where you got a lot of people that might have been concerned. Well, more towards, Quarry Park, Salem Lake, Reynolds Park, the Greenways, there seem to be a good deal of people who have a lot of enjoyment. So if you can just make sure that you're putting them there and that people tend to seem to enjoy it, we'll be friends.
Perfect.
And I'm saying we, as particularly the Southeast Ward.
Perfect.
I like friends. Thank you.
We have a road council district. Okay, anything else? All right, thanks for everybody. And with that entertainment, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.